It's 3 a.m. You're awake. Your phone is already in your hand before you've decided to pick it up. You lie there telling yourself something is wrong with you, but the real answer is far stranger. You are not broken. You are ancient. For most of your life, you've probably believed sleep is supposed to be one long, unbroken block. 8 hours, lights off, lights on. Anything less feels like failure. You blame stress, you blame screens, you blame your mattress. But your ancestors would not have recognized this idea of sleep at all, because for almost the entire span of human history, sleep didn't work that way. Go back before electricity, before streetlights, before candles that could burn all night, before anything that could push back the dark. When the sun went down, there was nothing to do but stop. And in that stopping, something strange happened. People slept in two distinct phases. The historian A. Roger Eckhart spent years digging through diaries, court records, and medical texts from pre-industrial Europe. He found the same phrase again and again. First sleep, and later, second sleep. People would lie down not long after dusk, sleep for 3 or 4 hours, and then wake. Not in a panic, not checking anything. They would simply be awake in the dark for an hour or two. Then they would sleep again until morning. What did they do in that gap? Some prayed, some talked quietly with a spouse, some got up and tended the fire, or checked on animals, or sat with their thoughts. Physicians of the time wrote about it as a useful window for digestion, for reflection, even for conception. It was not treated as insomnia. It was treated as normal. It had a name. It had a purpose. Nobody reached for a pill because nobody thought anything was wrong. Now here's the question. If this was normal for thousands of years, why does it feel like a disorder today? The answer starts with light. Cheap, abundant, always-on light. Gas lamps in the 1800s, electric bulbs by the early 1900s. Once artificial light became common, the long, dark evening that used to stretch for 10 or 12 hours in winter got compressed into something much shorter. People started going to bed later and waking earlier, cramming sleep into a tighter window. The two-phase pattern didn't have room to exist anymore. It got squeezed into one block, and the version of sleep you grew up thinking was normal is actually a fairly recent invention. Maybe 200 years old, in a species that has existed for roughly 300,000 years. A researcher at the National Institute of Mental Health named Thomas Wehr decided to test this directly. In the early 1990s, he took a group of volunteers and put them in an environment with 14 hours of darkness a day. No artificial light allowed in the evening, closer to what a long, ancient winter night would have looked like. Within a few weeks, something shifted. The volunteers stopped sleeping in one solid stretch. They began sleeping in two distinct bouts, with a period of quiet, calm wakefulness in between. Nobody trained them to do this. Nobody told them what was supposed to happen. Their bodies simply reverted, on their own, to a pattern that modern light had been suppressing the whole time. Think about what that means. The 3-hour block where you can't sleep, where you stare at the ceiling and feel like your body has betrayed you, might not be a malfunction at all. It might be a very old setting trying to reassert itself in a world that no longer gives it room. But there's a piece of this story that complicates things. Not everyone agrees that segmented sleep was universal, and some of the most compelling evidence points the other way. A sleep researcher at UCLA named Jerome Siegel wanted to know what sleep actually looks like in societies that still live without electricity today. So he studied 3 groups, the Hadza of Tanzania, the San of Namibia, and the Tsimane of Bolivia, none of them connected to modern power grids, none of them living anything like a Western schedule. He fitted them with devices that tracked movement and rest around the clock. What he found surprised a lot of people. These groups did not sleep in 2 neat segments with a wakeful gap in between. They slept in one continuous stretch, averaging under 6.5 hours a night, often going to bed several hours after sunset and waking before sunrise. No naps to make up the difference. No biphasic pattern at all. In other words, some of the last people on Earth living close to how ancient humans lived were not doing what Echart's European Diaries described. So which is it? Did your ancestors sleep in 2 neat pieces, or one continuous one? The honest answer is probably both, depending on where and when you're asking about. Human sleep was never one rigid, universal template. It bent around climate, around latitude, around how long winter nights actually were, around whether a fire needed tending or a predator needed watching for. In freezing, 12-hour European winter nights, splitting sleep into 2 phases with quiet time in the middle may have simply made sense. In warmer, more consistent climates, a single consolidated block may have worked just fine. Your body wasn't built with one fixed sleep rule. It was built with flexibility, tuned by darkness, temperature, and whatever demanded your attention that night. What both lines of research agree on is something quieter and maybe more useful. Waking briefly in the night is not automatically a crisis. It shows up across cultures, across centuries, across totally different environments. What seems to matter most isn't whether you wake up. It's what you do once you're awake. Ancient humans who stirred in the dark didn't reach for anything that made their brains think it was daytime. There was no blue light spilling into their eyes, no headlines, no notifications, no dopamine drip designed by someone who studied exactly how to keep your thumb moving. They stayed in the dark, doing dark appropriate things, quiet things, and critically they weren't afraid of being awake. Fear of the wakefulness itself may be the newest part of this entire equation. That fear has a mechanism. When you wake at 3 a.m. now and immediately think something is wrong with me, your body responds to that thought as a threat. Cortisol rises, your heart rate ticks up. You have taken a completely ordinary biological event and, through the story you told yourself about it, turned it into a stress response. Your ancestors, as far as the evidence suggests, mostly weren't doing that. They expected to be awake sometimes. It wasn't a problem to be solved. It was simply Tuesday. There's a modern mirror here that's hard to miss. You live in a world engineered to erase the dark entirely. Screens in every room. Light pollution so dense that most people on the planet have never seen the full spread of the Milky Way. Notifications timed by algorithms that know exactly when you're vulnerable to picking up your phone. You've inherited a nervous system built for long, unhurried darkness, and you've dropped it into an environment that treats darkness as something to be immediately fixed, filled, or scrolled through. So the next time you wake at 3 a.m., here's what's actually happening, as far as the science can tell you. Your body might be doing something old, something that shows up in some form, across centuries and continents, long before anyone had a word for insomnia. It isn't asking you to panic. It isn't asking you to check your phone. It might simply be asking you to sit in the dark for a while, the way people did for most of human history before anyone convinced them that being awake at night was something to fear. It's 3 a.m. You're awake. Your phone doesn't have to be in your hand at all, because maybe you were never broken. Maybe you were just remembering.